Evening, everyone. This is a regular meeting of the Lorain City School Academic Distress Commission on this Wednesday, November 29th. At this time, we'll have a call to order.
Mr. Coffin?
Present.
Mr. Monteleone?
Present.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Present.
Mr. Richardson?
Here.
Dr. Solis?
Present.
We'll also have approval of the agenda.
Mr. Coffin?
Yes.
Mr. Monteleone?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Richardson?
Yes.
And Dr. Solis?
Yes.
And at this time, we'll also have an approval of the November 6, 2017 minutes.
Mr. Coffin?
Yes.
Mr. Monteleone?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Richardson?
Yes.
And Dr. Solis?
Yes.
So for the record, item 5, an overview of the Attorney General's relationship with the Academic Distress Commission, as well as the roles of the Distress Commission and our responsibilities per House Bill 70. We wanted to have James Miller, who is the Assistant Attorney General, who represents Lorain City Schools Academic Distress Commission, not the CEO. We wanted him to come and just give an overview publicly of the relationship and the role. Unfortunately, he had a personal matter and could not make it tonight. And so at this time, we're going to move to the next agenda item, which is the consideration of approval of the improvement plan. But before we call it or bring it to a vote, we wanted to, we had some questions for the CEO, and at this time, we would also allow any members of the public to ask questions of the CEO as well. So at this time, I don't know if anyone on the commission would like to kick off. They had a few questions for the CEO regarding the improvement plan. And if so, take the floor.
All right. Since nobody's jumping in, I guess I will. I've read through the plan multiple times. We've talked about it. And it's a very ambitious plan. It's a good plan, which I support wholeheartedly. But I wonder, when you start to think about executing the plan and organizationally, there might be some changes or different roles or things like that that need to be part of this to make this happen. I wonder if you can talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Great question. Thank you. So the way the plan is organized, it's broken up into 5 commitments, and each of those commitments are attached to specific offices that some of them are created, others we had to create in order to accomplish these goals. For example, if we look at commitment 1, and it speaks about supporting our scholars at birth, we need to think about rethinking what that work looks like and what it's going to take. And that's the birth of, and no pun intended, but the birth of the Chief Family Office. That example is also the example of why we have the chief positions. So we have 7 chief positions that are currently posted. And I'm happy to report, at first I was apprehensive of who was going to apply and how many folks were going to turn up for these positions, and I might even quoted a different number than what I have now. But for those positions, we've had over 213 applicants, which has been a tremendous turnout, which makes it challenging on one right of finding the right person, because there's so many great candidates out there, but at the same time, I feel good that people are bought into what we're trying to do. So yes, there is some reorganization. I'm encouraged by those that have applied, and most importantly, I'm encouraged about now we can start to find the right people to push forward that direction. But thank you for the question.
So I really don't have a question. I just have more comments, and this is just to the public. I just want everybody to understand that organizational change that we're embarking on takes time, and it's going to happen in phases. So I just want everybody to give Mr. Hardy some time to execute the plan, realize that the first phase, as he has spoken about before, is really to focus on changing the culture and climate. Lorain has, unfortunately, we have a culture of falling short, and sometimes that is because we have approached it looking at the threshold of achievement first, instead of making sure that the change is starting from the top to the building and et cetera. So sometimes that takes just the culture and the climate part, may take up to 2 years, educationally speaking. So that doesn't mean that growth isn't going to happen. Obviously, when you change climate and culture, growth will take place. So we will see growth in our students. But I think as far as looking at that threshold achievement, we should give David some time to execute, and his team some time to execute that plan properly.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And I like to add to that point about growth. You know, you talk about 5 commitments, and, you know, kind of this P through, 18, P through 20 approach to educating and working with the whole child. Can you speak about some of the interventions that may need to happen for kids who are currently in the district, right, who necessarily don't fit the continuum because they're not starting as newborns,
Right.
and they're here functioning. They may have some
Sure.
learning differences or maybe need some remediation. Can you speak a little bit about those processes and how you hope to support teachers in that process as well?
It's a great question as well. Thank you for that. That speaks a lot to Commitment 5 and specifically Strategy 1, which talks about increasing the rigor of math and ELA instruction. And that starts with us rethinking what it means to have a rigorous classroom, what it means to have a great teacher in every room that's provided the curriculum necessary to be successful. But it also means just because we have blocks of time in which core instruction is happening, there's more that we have to do to catch kids up now. So that's pushing on having intervention blocks during the day. That's pushing on the idea of extending the day or making the day more flexible if we think about our high school students, scholars. If we also think about our elementary kids, thinking about, hey, do we need to think about extending the year or even moving into the summer with some of our programming to support our kids who are furthest behind? You know, it breaks my heart when I hear, 6th, 7th, 8th graders who are reading at a 2nd or 3rd or 4th grade level. And we know that we physically cannot catch them up during the regular, typical school day. We have to look outside the box. In the very short term, I spoke with principals in November around some very aggressive and proactive plans to close the gap as much as we can right now. So I left them with 3 charges, one of which was focus on making sure that every single one of your scholars are in school every single day. Because if they're not, we can't educate them. The second was thinking about setting goals and making sure that we have clear goals where our students are right now. So if we look at their formative assessment results right now, how are they performing? What can we feasibly do over the next month, over the next 3 months, and leading up to state test? And then 3, having a very aggressive formative assessment plan. So basically finding a way to check for our scholars' understanding along the way to ensuring they're getting what they need in the short term. Will we close that whole gap in 3 or 4 months? Absolutely not. It is going to take a significant amount of time. But I think the mindset of shifting how we think about interventions and thinking about support more intensively will get where we need to be over time. So principals were at a meeting in November where we had this conversation. A few are in the audience and nodding and smiling as we speak because the urgency is if it's not there already, it's about to increase because we no longer can allow our scholars to be left on the sideline.
And so to follow up from a practical, because I'm not an educator, right? And I'm just curious to get an understanding of how does that happen on the day-to-day. How do we monitor that to make sure that's actually happening and that those goals, a very aggressive formative assessment plan, like how do we monitor that and make sure that we're actually doing it building to building where needs are?
Mm-hmm. So there's 3 things, 2 of which are longer term, 1 is shorter term. I'll start with the longer term and then speak to the shorter term. Longer term, we're looking to build a data dashboard that will encompass all of our metrics and all of our key performance indicators that will tell us progress depending on the indicator on a week-to-week or month-to-month basis. So for example, if you take attendance, which is a pretty easy one to track, put it into a system and assign it to schools, we can easily create a dashboard that allows us to see how our students, or if our students are coming every day. They have meetings with principals have meetings with their direct supervisor. If they're falling behind, create intervention plans for our scholars that are not showing up every single day, and making sure that we're making phone calls and home visits, and you can kind of go down the trail there.
Yeah.
But the inflection point is when we start to see the problem, not when it's already becoming a problem. Right? So identifying that early through our dashboard long term. 2, the chief schools officer and the chief equity and achievement officer have a big job ahead of them because they are the ones that are going to be driving this engine to make sure that when we look at the academic side, we have the right curriculum in place, we have the right teaching and pedagogy going on, and that the chief schools officer is developing our principals to make sure they're instructional leaders who are monitoring on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis. In the very short term, we have to put a Band-Aid on this as much as we can so we can address the needs of our kids now. So throughout the month of December, made this commitment to principals. It will be me personally going into schools for large chunks of days to walk with them, to coach them, and focus on the three things I left them to accomplish. Ms. Gonzalez is probably looking at my calendar and saying, how are we going to make this possible? But we'll find a way. But that has been the goal. The second piece of that, in January, we're going to spend some time looking at our data practices and spending significant time of looking at where our kids are on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis with our principals. And that is something we'll talk about in December. So principals that are out there, you're getting a sneak peek of our conversation in December. But more importantly, it is time for us to look at the right numbers and making sure that we're putting not just numbers next to kids, but names next to them as well, so that we're focusing on our young people first.
Absolutely. Any other questions from the commission?
I would just say I'm encouraged, and David and I talked about the Commitment 5 with the Titan College or CCP program and kind of cultivating that and having that grow for our students. I think that's an important piece, and a piece that we have some success now in kind of making that continue to be a very successful component of our district.
And thank you, Steve, for that, because I think, you know, I was speaking to a scholar, and this is not the first scholar that I've spoken to about this, who came to us in 9th grade and said, you know, I was excited about the possibilities, but now as a 10th or 11th grader, I'm looking at the possibilities I don't have. And they're looking at their calendar and saying, I'm going to finish my 12th grade year in December and have nothing to do the rest of the spring. It breaks my heart to think that we don't have courses, we don't have pathways to reach all of our kids right now. So expanding and looking at CCP, looking at early college, looking at other ways to get our kids to pathways where they can explore and think and be pushed when they walk into our doors of our high school, and think about that in our middle schools, is imperative. So we're building a pretty aggressive plan to make sure that happens. So we won't have kids that are saying, I don't know what to do. They'll say, I don't know if I can do it all, which is a better problem for me.
Any other comments or questions?
I just want to say that I really appreciate the commitment to inclusiveness about the plan. I felt as though all students across the spectrum, as well as across socioeconomic, ethnic diversity, I felt a sense of belonging in this plan that I think we heard a lot from the community during the process about, and so I felt that throughout this document, and I appreciate that part of this especially.
Thank you.
And I'd like to add another thing. Again, I don't want to dominate the discussion, but I'm just really, if I don't know something, like to ask questions to be informed, right? I think that's really important. And so when we talk about, we talked about Commitment 5 quite a bit, and for just looking at the plan as an aggregate, just the sum total of it all, it is really aggressive, and it is really an amazing plan in terms of where we can take this community, right? Not just the district, the community. Mm-hmm. And I'm in full support of it. But I always say a plan is only as good as the players that are able to carry out the plan. And so, can you talk a little bit about the supports and how? I know, Patty, you talked to it a little bit about having the organizational, administrative side of it. But what are some of the supports, and how do we bring teachers along in a way that's meaningful and authentic?
That's a great point as well. There's a few things. One, I think of a college professor at one point who came to answer, I thought it was at the time I thought it was a pretty profound question, but it had a really easy answer. And he asked, what do you do when, principals, at the time we were talking about principal leadership, what do you do if you don't have an answer from a principal? And we were all thinking really deep, like this must be a really hard answer to get to. And he said, you just ask them. And I think what we haven't done and we will do more of is get to our teachers and ask them questions and ask them what they need. And I think teachers have been outstanding at either finding one-on-one time with me. We actually had a meeting earlier this week with a teacher who had some ideas and concerns, or just having the forums for them to speak with me and speak with members of our team. So some of which has started already through our town halls, which take place every second Thursday of the month. And they're at 6, the next one's at 6 p.m. On December 14th here at Lorain. But Also adding another structure, calling it the lunch bunch, the CEO lunch bunch. So I will be going to schools to actually go to where our teachers are. Because again, teachers are busy and they should be with our kids. So why would I take them away from that? So I need to go to them. So I'll be spending time in schools to listen to our teachers. My promise is still the same. By the end of January, identifying the big initiatives that we'll be pushing on, and getting feedback from our teachers before we actually push on them. That was one of the biggest things that I heard from teachers. We have a lot of stuff done to us, not for us or with us. So I stand committed to bringing ideas, big ideas to them first before we make final decisions on the direction we'll go that is aligned to our plan.
Great.
Great. Well, at this time, if there aren't any other comments or questions, I'd like to bring the improvement plan to a vote. Roll call.
Mr. Coffin?
Yes.
Mr. Monteleone?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Richardson?
Yes.
And Dr. Solis?
Yes.
Okay. Wow. I feel like this is taking so long, and it's been a long process. And again, the summer was really intense. The fall was really intense, very tumultuous, politically charged. And I just want to publicly thank the commission, our CEO, and our community for standing our ground and really putting kids first, and thinking about as what's important. And I think a lot of times we get caught up in adult personalities, politics, local versus state control, Democrat versus Republican, and in all of this, we don't talk about our kids and our children and our scholars, and I think if we can be kid-centric, and no one cares who gets the credit, great things can happen for the city of Lorain. And so I just want to say thank you to the commission, thank you to the CEO for putting together an amazing plan, and just want to give you a round of applause because
Thank you, Tony, for your leadership.
this is really transformative work. So at this time, I would like to open it up to public comment. If there are any people here that are part of the community, surrounding communities that would like to come up and offer any thoughts or insights. No public comment.
Everybody's good with the plan.
Okay, so we'll move along here. We actually do not have an executive session to go into, so we're going to skip that item on the agenda. And at this time, I'd like to ask someone to make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Vote?
Mr. Coffin?
Yes.
Mr. Monteleone?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Richardson?
Yes.
And Dr. Solis?
Yes.
Thank you, and have a good night.
This has been a production of Lorain City Schools TV 20 WLCS.